All right. Did we miss anything?
Yeah. So the shaved head bit.
Please talk about the shaved head.
It's all you, bro.
Okay. So the thing about shaved heads is such a weird thing. So the reason he says that it would be.
What verse were you?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Let me open up my self-printed Bible.
Verse 5?
Yeah. So, yeah, verse 5. For every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, so that's in that sort of seductive, sexually immoral, wanton way, okay, dishonors her head, her source, her husband, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. So what that comes from is in the book of Numbers, if a woman was caught in adultery and it was proven, they shaved her head. So she's saying that having your hair down in this sexually explicit, wanton, seductive way is this. What he's saying is it's the same as being an adulteress. So you might as well just go ahead and shave your head because the dishonor is the same. Yeah. So it's in Numbers 5. You can go find it. So yeah. And he says, and that's why it's disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, because now it looks like in their culture, the only women with short shaved hair were adulteresses.
So I'd like to point out that it keeps saying wife and not woman. Is that...
okay. The reason why, honestly, if I can just give it, is the reformed bias of the ESV.
That...
The English Standard Version that I use tends to translate ways in a way that if you're not careful, will unintentionally have a bias towards complementarian theology. And so they say wife rather than woman. It's the same word.
I know, but I'm
completely
disagreeing
appropriate.
with the bias premise, because I feel like if it was woman, it'd be much more, if you want to say controlling. Yeah,
but that's because they are interpreting the head idea as authoritative hierarchical and that's social hierarchy. So God, Christ is the source of men. Christ is the authority over men. Men are authority over their wives. Because even in the Bible, men don't have authority over other women.
Right.
Men only have authority over their wives and
so that's going to
their
be
female children.
Ephesians 5 or 6?
Ish, yeah. Sort of, but not even. But it does affect Ephesians 5 because he says Christ is the head of the church. Christ is the source of the church versus, yeah. But Christ is also the authority of the church because he's the Lord of the church. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's the head shave thing.
Yeah.
It was a sign that you had basically committed adultery, so they shaved your head. And so he's saying, if you're going to have your hair long, you might. You see, he's kind of making a little play on there, right?
Yeah, the same.
If you're going to have it long, you might as well shave it.
Well, the same thing he makes almost exactly when he says, "I wish those who would tell you to mutilate the flesh would just mutilate the whole thing,
emasculate themselves."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's kind of making that same.
It's like an extremist argument, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
to prove that it's not.
It's absurdist.
Right.
So it's an extremist argument to prove the absurdity of the fact. Because these women say, well, I would never shave my head. But he's like, you're promoting yourself as an adulterous woman. Why don't you just go ahead and shave your head?
Yeah. So I thought we were going to talk more about like dress code and modesty, because I feel like that's probably what is more applicable to the modern church.
I think it is.
Yeah. You want to know something interesting, though? I was going to bring this up eventually, is that I... just on my scrolling on social media and stuff, I can definitely say there is there's an overall trend or resurgence of return to orthodoxy among young people. That's a very big thing right now, in either going Eastern Orthodox or Catholic. But even so, this kind of goes with that. But even in people that are still remaining Protestant, there's a whole new
there's like a
Christian
neo-holiness
veiling thing among
like physical veiling,
like almost like
Mennonites or
not like Mennonite head coverings, but like with a scarf head covering for like Protestant women, and these are like young women going to like regular churches, almost like hijab type wrapping, but they're not fully covering their hair because they're not doing it for that modesty.
Did you know about this?
But it's for the prayer.
Why don't you tell me about these things? So they're
This
praying in church and they're putting a covering over their head.
They're veiling because
Are they
of this
appealing
passage.
to this
yes,
passage?
And I've seen it appealed to. So I was interested in like how you would rebut that, or
First off, I wouldn't rebut it.
yeah,
I would just
is
say
it okay to
that's not
just
the
be
intent
like,
of the passage.
but you do you.
Yeah, I mean, if
kind
they
of?
feel like that's a conviction, yeah, but I would say it's more about being appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to say.
Decorum. I can't get away from this idea. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The idea of decorum in the ancient world, we think the ancient world was kind of bifurcated in the sense of, yeah, when it got to the religious part, it was crazy and insane and all over the place. But the Greeks and the Romans actually believed in social decorum.
Yeah.
That's why people who were truly outrageous in the ancient world were killed and got rid of. Caligula was gotten rid of. Nero was gotten rid of. When it found out that Plato or rather it was Socrates was inappropriate with his, he was not following the rules of decorum with his younger male students. He was, they didn't mess with that. They did not value wild, free diversity. They absolutely didn't. And so what Paul is saying is he's saying the Greeks think that's just reserved for this group of people. And if they come in and they see you guys in Christian, they're just going to think you're them. And so that was it. So, but to legalistically say this passage exactly means that if a woman's going to pray or prophesy, she needs to physically cover her head with fabric. That's a too literal a reading of the text, because Paul's not even being literal when he says covering your head.
Yeah. Well, so, have you ever taken your hat off when you went into church?
Yes, I do, because it's socially appropriate,
Right.
not because it's spiritually.
Yeah.
It's not a spiritual law. It's a social law.
Yep.
But wouldn't the root of that social law be the spiritual?
No, the root of that social law would be cultural interpretations of passages like this.
Okay.
Yeah. So like this, like an idea of reverence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you take your hat off maybe at the dinner table,
Right.
or when you're praying,
Yeah.
or even if you're saying the American
Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
Well, Pledge of Allegiance is also like at baseball
national
games.
anthem.
Yeah, the
You
national
take your
anthem.
hat
Yeah,
off. Yeah.
exactly. So it's not necessarily like that it's wrong that you didn't take your hat off,
Right.
in a spiritual sense, but
No,
kind of in
no.
a cultural sense. You're like,
Right.
maybe I should.
It's not culturally appropriate. It's not decorum. It's just considered rude. It's not sinful. It's just rude, or dishonoring, or a yeah.
So do
Yeah.
you want to rant about dress codes on stage now?
Do I want to rant about dress codes on stage? No, because I'm just going to sound like a Scooby-Doo villain, just an angry old man who's upset at these meddling kids. I just think that if you're going to have holes in your pants, there should be more pant than hole. Am I too wrong?
No, I
Valid.
think. Well, I was going to make the case that part of the reason why we see the younger people going towards orthodoxy and this kind of tradition is because this kind of like openness, like anything goes, and there's a resistance to
Yeah,
that.
I think it's a blowback,
Right.
a backlash,
A backlash of like,
from me wearing skinny jeans. I absolutely think that. It's my fault.
it was your skinny jeans.
It was my skinny jeans that caused the new holiness movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not gonna, come to like a consensus on yes, like this is okay, but this is not okay. But I think the conversation should be had. Like
Yeah.
there are things you should, if you're on stage at a church, you're on the worship team or whatever, you should consider how you dress. You should consider how you're, presenting yourself.
I
for a number
agree
of
with
reasons.
that. Yeah, I agree with that. I also agree that with our creative content, we should ask ourselves, does this look more like secular entertainment, ungodly secular entertainment, or does it look like reverent worship? I think the preaching, does it sound more like irreverent secular stand-up or political rants, or does it sound like sacred teaching of the gospel? See, I don't think it's just, I think worship team's the easy one to pick on, honestly. But I do think that all of those things, we've seen them. We've seen churches get very weird with Easter plays and using secular ideas for the Easter play, which again, I'm the first about not, I'm very comfortable appropriating secular culture to make a spiritual point.
Yeah. You're the master of
Paul
our
was-
pop culture
Yeah,
references.
I'm not against that. Relying on it, substituting it, indulging in it, I think those are very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'd be easy to start naming different churches.
That's why I'm not, by the way.
Right.
I'm not
no,
intentional. I
I
don't
know,
think
yeah.
that's cool either.
Yeah, I think.
Unless they come from me.
Well, there. Yeah, I mean, like, there's reaction videos to all that stuff from popular YouTube, artists and stuff, and there's probably valid discussion around it. Like, I don't think it would be wrong for us to necessarily have that kind of conversation, but there's also, like, again, we're talking about the pragmatism and prudence and discernment. They're under a covering as well, from their church or denomination, that they're handling those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so
I think what's interesting about that is a lot of times people who do like those rebuke videos or whatever those call outs, they'll actually use Paul is like who they use. But they forget this was a personal, Paul knew these people. Paul had the context of the things they were doing. Paul was not disassociated from any church that he wrote to.
Right. And these are also private letters to them.
They're private letters to them
that are circulated within the church, and obviously,
right.
It's
but again, but Paul did this in the context of a burden and a relationship and a pre-existing relationship to all of his churches. Paul didn't just hear a rumor about a church in Thyatira and say, "Hey, I'm going to write you guys a letter because I heard this about you." And I think a lot of those reaction videos and things like that are. Some of my followers sent me this clip and wanted me to comment on it on a 30-second clip from an entire sermon. Now I try to discern those, but ultimately, Brian, why don't you and Miles name names or call people out? Number one, if we teach what we think the Bible teaches, you'll find them and you'll make a discerning choice on your own. Number two, I don't have authority other than being a brother in Christ. And if they've not invited me into that, then I'm not going to, cast those pearls before someone who's not going to pay attention to it. So that's our
cast
theory.
Stones, but pearls.
Well, people in glass houses shouldn't cast stones.
It's good.
I don't know.
Anything else that you think we?
I'm all for modesty. Yes, and amen. I guess I want to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a research to that too. I honestly think it's more coming. I think a lot of it's coming from. There are versions of the church, I think, especially in the U.S. I think this is more of a U.S. phenomenon of the return to orthodoxy among Gen Z. And I think it's because to some, there's a perception that, like, church doesn't feel sacred anymore. And it's hard to find sometimes a church that can bridge that gap without being full Orthodox.
Yeah, so I think that,
especially in most areas, some you can find churches that are kind of liturgical and
I think that
dipping both toes in, but it's
I think that probably is a little bit of a backlash from the overall kind of seeker sensitive and attractional model and all that kind of stuff. I do think that some churches went so far that there was a loss of sacred. I find in my work with people who are really unchurched, it confuses them when church doesn't feel sacred.
Yeah,
they show up and they're like this. They don't know what they were looking for, but they were expecting some level of sacredness, some level of divine unction. And if a church is too far relevant, I hate that kind of stuff, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's none of it left. So.
And there's a lot of it left in in Roman Catholic. You look at their.
No. I mean, it doesn't feel like the sacredness is left in that specific church.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
In that specific church. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe some of that's, like you say, Christians that are at church, but I think even just society, American society, and maybe the West and a lot of places that have adopted kind of postmodern, anything and everything, that anything and everything is kind of chaotic, and they want to come back to, deep, sacred, iconic, stuff because. We start to see what it looks like when it devolves into anything goes, and oh gosh, I don't like that.
And even I think it was Nietzsche that said once you eliminate that, you have to make it up.
Right.
You can't exist without it. If you eliminate God, you have to make him up. You have to fill him in somewhere. So it becomes about art, or it becomes about culture, or it becomes about practice or something like that.
Yeah, and art could be a banana duct tape to the wall.
Yeah, or an NFT of a monkey.
Monkey guy. Yeah.
Yeah, yacht monkey.
Right. And so just not having anything rooted to, if you throw away all the tradition and throw away everything that's from how we got here, and then you try to reinvent something, I mean, man, you've thrown away a lot.
Well, without tradition, you are as shaky as a fiddler on the roof.
Tradition.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Tradition. Sorry.
That's good.
Yeah. No, it's a good discussion. It's hard to have because it's like, what? Like, you can't point to it specifically. You can just sort of go, this. So is it open your service with a secular song is right? Yes or no? That's what people want to do. And you're like, I don't.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
okay,
know.
so like
It's flavor almost,
worship,
right?
Yeah, so like worship traditions, there's gonna be times where we're like, hey, let's put a hymn, like let's come back to like shoot, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. You talk about the old rugged cross,
Yeah,
like
do
a lift from like something like that, and then or the doxology,
Right?
Like there's these things where we have these moments, in kind of an artistic music expression in modern churches where we kind of do that, and everyone's like, oh. Yeah, I like this.
Yeah.
And
Right.
like, where's this been? And so, when you say seeker sensitive, sometimes, we've thrown away, a lot of maybe icons or things that were hard to, I don't know, maintain.
Yeah, and I think we did it almost in some ways for the same reasons Paul is saying. Are you thinking of the outsider?
Right.
But in doing that, we don't talk about the blood of Jesus. You don't talk about the violence of the Old Testament. You don't talk, and so in trying to do that, you are making it readyable, but you're not taking the truth and making it accessible. You're just you're kind of diluting it and dumbing it down. And I think what you see now is a reaction to that. There are songs right now that sound more like songs that I listened to in Arkansas in the 80s. I mean, what's her name? The Thank You for the Blood Applied.
Yeah, Charity Gale.
Charity Gale, right? I mean, that song feels like a Southern gospel old song, and it brings that same. And she's using words in that song that are very like within that, at the height of the seeker movement, you would have never heard those songs and those words in church. Yet here's this younger woman bringing these songs back, bridging it into a hymn and a chorus, because tradition, one of the benefits of tradition is continuity. It ties you to generations of the church previous in the same way that baptism does, in the same way that communion does. When we sit down and we share communion at our church, we're doing the same thing that Paul was trying to get these Corinthians to get right. We just had a big baptism celebration. That's the same thing. So these traditions are important. Paul's very, very good, though, about saying one was a command, which was communion.
Right.
This other stuff is traditions. And Paul's very careful in his language.
Yeah. Culture kind of has, it seems, from my perspective, that culture kind of has these pendulum, swinging moments. And perhaps the reason why seeker sensitive and we kind of went away from these traditions is because we turned traditions into idols. Right. We made the doctrine dogma. Right. Taking things out of where they were meant to be. Right.
It's a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, to use Paul's words.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we had tradition, but we didn't have memorial. Paul is saying your hair length is a tradition. It's proprietary. It's just cultural. Communion is a memorial, and those are different. And baptism is an ordinance. It's a thing it's a command. And so I think where that lies is saying how much of we can't ignore these two commands. So how much tradition does my community need to bring it into the greater family of Christ and yet not alienate people who find it inaccessible? That may mean that I'm going to have more tradition than I'm comfortable with, or it may mean I have to sacrifice the level of tradition I prefer because I'm not doing it for me.
Right.
I'm doing it for them.
Yeah, and it'd be good. It would be good for us to always be examining how we run our churches and what we're doing to answer that very question. Is it just for us and what we feel comfortable with? What maybe older generations have felt comfortable with, or is this something that is intended to reach folks and I mean, Paul's argument, right?
But Paul says, I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage. So Paul's saying, I will give it a shot. This is the same Paul who says, as far as it is possible, you live at peace with everybody. So he knows he's not going to make everybody happy. But he says, it's not for my advantage. I'm going to do the things I do so that you can have a chance to connect with Jesus. And it's not generational. I planted a church. By the second week, you have traditions. I mean, you just do. Anything you do twice when you're a church planter, that's a tradition now. If you did if you did it the same way 2 weeks in a row, that's a church planter. Now that's the way that's the way we do things. And so just holding those pretty loosely and always discerning. I think that's even Paul's sort of church approach, is just don't stop discerning. We talked a little bit about this in the last, Did We Miss Anything? But again, that's where Barth's definition of, that's what theology does. Theology helps us take the immediacy, right? The timeliness of the method with the timelessness, or the transcendence, the immediacy of the method and the transcendence of the message. And it's theology that helps us keep those things bounded together in a healthy way. So, or threaded together if you do the work.